Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview on Human. Today, we will be interviewing Tony Zheng, the owner and operator of Ops Army, and has also been a founder of three different companies, one which was produced for the medical field. Today, we will be finding out his story. Without further ado, let us bring him on.
Hello, hello.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. How's the audio?
The audio is amazing, and the fact that my Bluetooth headphones are working with this is great. Say something.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Perfect.
perfectly fine. This is amazing.
All right.
This is gonna work wonders for the audio. Amazing.
Excited. Excited.
I'm excited to have you on too, my man. Yes, indeed. That's a nice picture in the background. I like
Thank
that. Can we
you.
take a
Thank
look at that before we start the interview?
you. Yeah, for sure. So
That's cool.
for the longest time, I thought it was the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's not. It's the Manhattan Bridge. So I've all throughout COVID, I was lying to people that that this was the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's the Manhattan Bridge. You can tell because of the kind of structure here. It's a different color than the Brooklyn Bridge. Um, and
Interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Well, without further ado, let us start the interview. Please let the audience know where you're from.
perfect. So I've lived in quite a few places growing up. Have been in Florida, California, Boston, DC for a little bit, but more recently, I'm here now in New York. And I'm actually in New Jersey right now, just spending some time with family. But normally, I would be in New York City.
Okay, okay. What are one of the significant differences you could point out from the different places you have lived in? Because that's fairly new to me. I didn't know that at
Yeah.
all.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I think it's culture and different ways of life, right? And so, for example, New York City has a very distinctive culture, and it's very much like, go, go, go. Let's go from point A to point B. And there's, literally everybody has a calendar maybe in their mind, right? All of the things that they need to crank through for the day. So it's very fast paced, and that's great. You're young, if you're like in your 20s and you like the hustle culture. But I think part of it is that you can also lead to a lot of burnout, right? And so, folks,
Mm,
for example, Boston, a lot slower pace. People move at their own clip. San Francisco, a lot slower pace, right? And then I also think beyond the culture, it's also the atmosphere. So, for example, I love New York. There's a certain energy to the city, and
mm,
you can't find that anywhere
mm.
else. And so that's why I'm still here in New York.
Yes, indeed. I'm originally from New York myself, Brooklyn. Born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens. Spent 24 years of my life out there from the time I was born up into my early 20s. And then I moved to Florida, actually. So we do have some similarities. And I'm actually curious,
Yeah.
did you grow up in San Francisco, or was that just a place that you went in your older years of life? Not older, obviously, you're only but so old, right? Yeah, yeah, I don't want to be, that guy. Live on air, right? But I want to ask, how was the experience in San Francisco, whether you went there when you was younger or older? Because I also went to San Francisco and I was actually, to be quite honest, devastated with the population that it was. Me being, part of the community that I reflect and not seeing so many people out there that reflects me, kind of left me a little stunned actually. So,
Yeah, it's a good question. So I moved out to, so and I guess I have good genes, I don't look that old, but I am climbing
you
up there.
do.
But for me, I moved out to San Francisco as soon as I graduated from college. So in college, I studied
Mm,
computer science and behavioral psychology. I've always been very interested in like entrepreneurship and startups and just this whole tech scene. And so graduating college, I was like, there's no other place to do it than the mecca of the startup world, which is San Francisco and just the Bay Area at large. So I wanted to kind of move out there, experience what it was like. And then, this is where like essentially, and then COVID hit. And something I realized over COVID is that family is just so important to me. right? It's one of my core values, and that has continued to grow with me the older I get. And so it's just so far, San Francisco, from family. It's literally, a 5.5 hour, 6 hour plane ride. You tack on travel to the airport, you tack on the time zone change. So it's literally a whole day of traveling just to come home, right? And so
Mm,
it was like, I can't really do this. I want to be closer to home. Let me move back to New York.
mm, interesting.
Yeah.
And now to get into your family, because what is your ethnicity, so that way people could get a great understanding of who you are.
Yeah, I would say I'm Chinese American, Asian American, and
Mm,
I think that hyphen's pretty important to me. So my parents immigrated here back in the early '90s, worked a bunch of odd jobs, started a business when I was a lot younger, and so I grew up in that business environment. But for me, it was very much, parents are Chinese, but growing up, I was very Americanized, right? So I went to, American
mm.
school. Most of my peers were not Asian in any capacity. And so I think that was like a pretty interesting experience growing up. But I'm Chinese American is a short answer.
Interesting. So I have a very interesting question that I think the audience will find to be, especially those who will be watching this interview later, to be important actually. So I've noticed that, like, let's say I say that I'm African American, right? I haven't met too many people, it's rare, not as much as I hear generation, right? So somebody would be like, I'm Chinese American. I rarely hear them say that. I hear them say like I'm Chinese fourth generation, but my parents came over here. Almost the same spiel, but a different way of approaching that. Why do you think that is? Because I do feel like people trace their roots back significantly far, excluding the community that I reflect. It's a difficulty there. So just hearing this from a different person of a different ethnicity, I think would be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important, right? Because growing up, um, I'm like half Chinese, half like American, right? And so the way I
Hmm.
think about the way I live my life, the way I kind of think about problems, right? The way I view issues is fundamentally not going to be completely Western, but at the same time, it's not
Mm,
Eastern either, right? And so because of that, I think it's important to have that hyphen, which is like Asian American, Chinese American, XYZ, right? And
mm,
so I think that's pretty important for me because that fundamentally like influences me, right? Like if you look at me, I look very atypical Chinese, Asian, what have you. But
mhm.
and then I open my mouth and it's like, oh, this guy does not speak with an accent. This guy does not, have those if we went camera off, you would think you'd just be talking to like some other person from New York, right? And so I think
Yeah,
that's pretty kind of that I think that's interesting, right? And
mm,
then yeah, I would say even the kind of Asian culture is so broad as well. There's like
hmm.
Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, even like South Indian, which is like or South Asian, which is Indian, and then even in the Indian space, it's quite broad as well. So I think
Hmm.
that's kind of interesting and unique and diverse.
Hmm. Interesting. Do you practice any traditions that you've possibly learned on the Western side, or has that been completely? This is my first time interviewing somebody who is, what did you call it? Chinese American?
Yeah.
This is my first time. This is great. So we get to kind of see the mix, right? Instead of just going full on culture of like diving deep into your culture, we actually get to see what it's like, I guess, for one who is Chinese or Asian of Asian descent to be Americanized, right? So I think that's interesting. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different approach, right?
Yeah, I think
So continue.
fundamentally you morph to whatever your environment you grew up in. And so for
Mm,
me, like I wish, my family were more um, culturally Chinese, right? And what I mean by that is I wish we celebrated more of like the Chinese kind of holidays, right? Besides Lunar New Year, like that's the one big one that we celebrate every year. But beyond that, I
mm,
did more celebrations and we were more connected and tapped into that a little bit more. And I think because of that, what you'll see is that, certain Asian communities aren't as tight as others. So, for example,
mm,
a lot of my friends who were Korean growing up, and then also folks that I went to college with who are Korean American, incredibly tight community. Most of them speak the Korean language and they speak English very fluently. But if you flip the script, right, a lot of Chinese Americans, like, we don't speak Chinese that well. And, if we do speak it, maybe we don't write it, right? And so I think there is a bit of a dichotomy. I do wish that the Chinese American community was a lot tighter knit. Like,
mm.
I have friends who are Jewish, for example, right? Jewish community, incredibly tight knit. Uh,
Incredibly.
Indian community, incredibly tight knit, right? Chinese American, not so much.
Mm, mm.
I stumped you there
What is the
a
difference
little
between?
bit. I stumped you.
Yes, yes. You have me. You have me scratching my chin. Yeah, but the thing that I would like to ask is, what is the difference between the Lunar New Year and the New Year's that we celebrate here? So I'm guessing that you celebrate New Year's twice, because I know New York, it's a big fiesta for New Year's.
Yeah,
That is for
yeah.
sure.
It's a little bit different. So it's based on a different calendar. And so as a result, the days don't always fall on like December 31st or January 1st. So typically it's anywhere from like, 4 weeks to like maybe up to like 8 or even 10 weeks after the kind of Western New Year. And the dates change
Mm,
every year because it's just based on like the lunar calendar. So it's a different kind of system. Um,
mm,
but other than that, I would say it's pretty similar. There's a lot of focus on family. And so for New Year, for my family, for example, we'll get together. My mom has three siblings on her side. My father has three siblings on his side. And we all live in different places, but when I was growing up and when I was a lot younger, we would come together a lot more and have
mm.
Lunar New Year together with the family. And that was always fun and nice because we're all doing different things now, all of my cousins, and the chance, whatever opportunity we get, we like to just come back together.
Mm. Nice. That's amazing that the unity is still there between you and your family members. That's really important. And actually, I do have a question of dealing with your parents. So, what is one value your parents instilled in you at a young age that you find important till this day?
I think it's a lot of different values, but if I had to pick one, I would say a level of work ethic and hustle.
Hmm.
And so what I mean by that is, um, I truly do believe, and this is maybe because of my background and how I was raised, but I truly do believe that anything you want in life is possible as long as you work towards it. And so it might take you 5 years, it might take you 10, 15 years, right? But ultimately, if you keep chiseling away at the marble, you will get a Michelangelo, right?
Mm,
You will get a David statue. And so I think today, and what I see is that a lot of people don't have that level of work ethic or drive because things come too easily now, right? Social media, if you log on, you can watch whatever show you want, you could message, you can connect with whoever you want. Video games, things like that, we all just very much stay indoors now. But there's a whole world out there that you have not experienced until you actually go out and you try to get it, right? It, And I really do believe that, as long as you put hard work in, whatever your goals are, it could be financial, it could be physical, right? If you're trying to get a six pack, whatever the case may be, it is really very much attainable. You're going to have a hell of a time just like struggling, you know, every day chiseling away, but eventually it's going to click and it's all going to come together, right? And then there is some higher power up there that will say, hey, if this guy or this girl just keeps hammering home on the door and, we reject them a couple times, maybe he or she fails, eventually they're just going to let up and say, hey, you know what? This guy or this girl is persistent. Just come on in, right? And then you just reach success. Um, you know, I,
mm.
I genuinely believe that, and I hope it to be somewhat true.
Because you're still on your journey now
That's
too, right? We all are. Me and you both. Yes, indeed. Now, this question is going to dive a little bit more deeper into the previous question or your answer to the previous question. So what, in your opinion, defines a person's work ethic?
What do you mean when you say what defines work ethic?
Defines it, well, defines in terms of what is your belief that good work ethic looks like? What are those components? Is it, having a schedule? Is it planting reachable goals? What does that look like? What defines a person's work ethic?
Yeah, I think so I like to journal quite a bit these days, and I recently just made a journal entry. It's called Man versus Man. And what it is I think a lot of what I wrote down in that journal was, what exactly does success mean, right? Why am I waking up every day and doing what I'm doing? And part of that is linked to work ethic. So I think work ethic is something intrinsic, right? Because if you're seeking external motivation, that's never going to work for you. It might work for a day, it might work for a week, but eventually the external motivation is going to go away and you're going to be left alone by yourself, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the morning, and you have maybe something you need to do bright and early tomorrow morning. Maybe you need to turn it in. And so when you're there by yourself, alone with your thoughts, what will keep you going, right? And so it's something inherently inside each individual person that drives him or her forward, right? That makes you want to go the extra mile. That's what work ethic is. For everybody, I think it's different, right? Some people
Mm.
are naturally very driven, right? Like, I want this, I want to achieve that. They're, type A go-getters, right? No problem with that. Some people are driven by financial means, right? Like, I want to achieve, I don't know, some, income target, maybe it's 7 figures, maybe it's 6 figures, whatever, right? That's fine. But I think for everybody, their goals are a little bit different, but regardless, I think work ethic comes from within, and that's, people define it a little bit differently.
Mm. What is the goal that keeps you driving to, and excuse me, what keeps your work ethic go moving forward?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Um, I will caveat this answer by saying I'm still trying to figure this out, right? I hope to have, a lot of life ahead of me and to explore everything that life has to offer and to figure it out. But I think for me, it's a couple different things. Number one is I want to leave some sort of impact on this
Mm.
while I'm here, and then ideally after I'm gone as well. So that's number one. Number two is I hope to bring happiness to the people around me. And then I would say the third thing is to be able to take care of my family, right?
Mm.
Not just parents, but also generations that come after me. So those things, are kind of some of the things that drive me. And then the other things is that, like, sometimes I like to do things just for funsies, right? And so, for example, I'm pretty involved with building out a tech community in New York City. There's really no kind of tangible impact outside of connecting people together, but it's fun, right? I like to put on these, like, pitches, these mixers, connectivity events, just to bring the community together. And for me, I
Mm.
think that's fun. I don't get any monetary benefits out of it. I actually invest in it, right? Because I put time, energy, and effort into it, but I don't really get any monetary return out of it. But for me, it's fun, right? I like doing that, bringing the community together.
You know what I like about what you just said? It just spawned off another really good question. And that is, why do you think it's important to have a deeper purpose for achieving what is it that you want in life, or what is it that you want to do in life besides monetary gain? Because you just explained why it is, but I want other people to hear what you have to say about that in hopes that they are inspired also,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
mean, I'll just say that there's nothing wrong if you are driven by monetary gains, right? Or, if you feel like, hey, I just want to do this, I just want to be in the moment, I just want to live life. I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? And matter of fact, it's actually great to have that mindset and that lifestyle, because building a company, trying to do something bigger, it's so hard. It's so hard, right? And so you really need to be driven more intrinsically. So to answer your question, you asked me, Why is it important to have a higher purpose? I don't think everybody should have like a purpose. It's totally fine if you just want to live in the moment. But that being said, I think having a higher purpose makes life more fun, right? If you just look at kind of where the world's at, I think that it's interesting. I think that it's interesting. There's many different projects going on. There's many different things happening, and we are on this earth for about 80 years or so. And so I think that if you want to do stuff that is, a little bit more fun, if you have a greater purpose, whatever that means, maybe it's building a community, maybe it's building a company. I think it just makes more fun because you could really squeeze as much out of life that you can.
Mm, okay. Okay. I like that. It was honest. That was cool.
Okay.
Um, what is one other one? Moving forward, I see that you went to school for computer science and behavioral psychology. Where do you think those two intersect at in today's world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a couple of thoughts on this. So for me,
Mhm.
Um, I actually started college not knowing what I wanted to study. So I first started off actually taking some like econ classes because I thought business was very interesting and I wanted to learn more about that. And then I actually switched over for like 2 weeks in college. I thought I wanted to be a physics major because I wanted to understand how the world worked. But the physics kind of curriculum was very intensive and it was also very theoretical. So it was not very like applied physics, right? And then I was like,
Mhm.
okay, what is something interesting? If I know that long-term wise, I'm interested in launching a venture of my own, what is something that could be helpful and applicable, right? So it's computer science. And I went to Columbia where there was a strong focus on the core curriculum. So in addition to, all these classes that you take for your major, concentration, whatever, you spend about a third of your time taking core classes, which are, classes in art history, music history. You learn about the classics. You read Odyssey, Aeneid, and
Mhm.
then there's like a bunch of other like components of the core curriculum, right? And I thought that was a lot of fun because that creates a well-rounded individual with different kind of interests and different backgrounds, and different subjects, right? And then, picked up, I think it was like my end of my sophomore, second year, started picking up computer science classes, thought that was interesting. And then towards like the mid to end of junior year, I started picking up behavioral psychology because I was really interested in understanding how people think. So like our thinking and decision making
Mm.
process, how does this influence how does this influence stereotypes, bias, prejudice, and then ultimately how does that kind of form the world in which we live in? And then I was really interested in the behavioral game theory side. So it's like from a markets economic perspective, why do we make the decisions and choices that we do? Why are we interested and engaged in the types of activities that we do, right? And so I thought that was really interesting.
Mm.
Now, to answer your question more succinctly, I think that there's so much going on with AI today, right? Like it's like every
Mm.
day there's like a new AI article or there like a new AI tool being introduced, right? And I think that different people have different opinions on this, but I genuinely believe that the future of technology, the future of AI is going to be a combination and a partnership between people and software or AI tools. But I
Mhm.
do think that society today is, for the vast majority of us, we're not really well equipped to, handle and manage and use a lot of these AI tools. So
Mm.
big knowledge gap, right? How do we train average day Joe Smiths of the world to just better use AI tools to incorporate it into their day-to-day operations? Because I do think that there's a lot of value to get out of AI. We're just not quite there yet from an educational perspective.
Hmm. Several questions I do have. So to start off, I wanted to start with the behavioral science piece and ask, when it came to stereotypes, how did outside, so stereotypes are kind of based on the way the person behaves, if I'm correct, right? Well, how does the outside, let's say the design of their communities and what is it that I'm looking for? Not design of their communities, their environments these people in, how much of that impacts the stereotypes
Oh,
that are
100%.
being
Yeah,
produced? Okay.
100%. I think so. Let's take America, for example, right? You are
Hmm.
African American, I am Asian American. Because of how we look on the outside, there's already certain preconceived notions of who we are as individuals, right? So just take me, for example, because I'm Asian American, there's already perceptions that, hey, I'm going to be good at math, I'm going to value education, I'm going to have a certain work ethic, and, all these other different things, right, that are associated with it. If I am in China, like those things will inherently still be there, but there's going to be a very different focus on them, right? So your environment 100% influences kind of how you're perceived as an individual. But then the interesting thing is that I think stereotypes can also change over time. Negative stereotypes can become positive, and then the vice versa is probably true as well, right? I think we are living in such a globalized world today where it's very interesting that like a lot
Mm.
of the kind of stereotypes are actually starting to come down a little bit. Like even in the US, right? You see a lot of movements, and a lot of cultural change involved with certain communities where certain stereotypes around certain communities are coming down. So I think, yeah, stereotypes definitely influenced by your environment, but that can also change over time as well.
Mm. I don't want to get too far, of course. I do have so many questions I want to ask there, but I want to be respectful of your time. I do
Sure.
understand you're a busy man. Okay, just one more, just one more. So, how does someone's perception, society's perception of one, impact their behavior altogether? I think that's interesting because, yeah, I know. Thank you.
No, that's a good question. It's a great question. I think it goes a few ways, right?
Hmm.
Part of it is maybe some people will just adhere to that stereotype or that particular perception of them, right? They just go with the flow like a jellyfish. Some will swim against the waves, right? They're like, hey, I have a perception of this. This does not define me. I am my own person. I am my own character individual. And so they subsequently, do things that maybe go against the grain of that stereotype. And then some people don't even let it bother them, right? It's like, I don't care, right?
Hmm.
I think it really depends on who you are as an individual, and that influences how you react against stereotypes. And I think a lot of that is based on your background, your upbringing, your mindset, where you want to go in your life.
Mm. Leading off of that case and into mental health, I wanted to ask you, how does mental health and tech intertwine? Being so that if I'm correct, you have worked with startup companies that are in the medical field, and I believe that they were associated with mental health care. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think mental health is one of those interesting where it's even today it's still very taboo, right? There
Mm.
isn't broader acceptance, right?
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
because
get exactly what you're saying.
yeah, I think in the US we're a bit more avant-garde, we're a bit more front runners with kind of having more resources, having more care for folks who suffer from mental health challenges. And mental health is so broad, right? It's you can have it could be something genetic that you're born with, it could be developed over time, right? And so it's such a broad word. But in other countries mental health care isn't getting as much support, right? So for example, I was
Mm.
talking to a coach in Madrid, Spain, and there is very little mental health care support for folks who need it in Spain. And then you take an example like, and that's like a pretty westernized, first world country, right? A lot of resources. And then, you look at a country like the UK, right, which has a completely different healthcare system, or like Canada, right? Completely different healthcare system. And even for folks there, it's not people recognize it, but there still isn't that level of support that is available, right? And then going back to the
Mm.
US, I think, for us in the US, I think there's there's a lot of folks who need some sort of mental health care support. Again, it's across the spectrum, right? And the big challenge in the industry now is how do you meet supply and demand, right? So if you look at stats of mental health care, it's been increasing, year over year. Part of this is because, there's better diagnostic tools to evaluate whether or not someone has some sort of mental health care challenge. But then if you apply the level of, therapists, the number of folks who can provide the care, right, and diagnose the care, it's just not quite there yet. And so I think from a tech perspective, now is a great time to be building in healthcare, to be building, mental health care services to provide access to people.
Interesting. Do you believe that this tech will it, because I feel like there's a gap going on with tech where a lot of people are getting laid off in that field. And so that's causing like the rise of AI to happen even more, where some people are kind of adopting AI in their, practices and kind of not necessarily doing away with humans, but kind of like diluting that effect, right? So the picture I'm trying to draw is with the rise of tech, will that lead to more jobs for people to come in and deal with one another face to face, or will that lead to another spark in AI's climb to where it's going, which in my opinion is pretty fast
Yeah.
nowadays.
Have you seen the movie Wall-E?
I've heard of it. No, I haven't seen it.
Like this Pixar animated movie about this
Hmm.
utopia where everything is like automated, there's robots for everything, and subsequently the humans don't need to do anything, so they just are like large people that sit on these like flying chairs and they
I
go
heard about that, yeah.
so I hope the world does not turn into like a Wall-E Disney animated utopia type of thing, but I do think that the future of jobs is going to look very different with the AI revolution, if you want to call it that we're seeing now and will continue to happen in the coming years. So I do believe that certain jobs that are like quite a lot more manual around just like data entry and things like that, those are going to look fundamentally very different than what they would look like in the future. But I still think, a lot of jobs will continue to stay here and are here for a long time, right? So I think
Mm.
doctors will still very much, their workflows will still, in their jobs will still look very similar, but how they perform, for example, surgeries and things like that is going to look very different. I also think, society is not well equipped for this broader AI innovation. So one example I like to point out is like self-driving cars, right? So, I have friends who work at like Tesla. I read like, interesting reports, but the world and our traffic system today is just not built for self-driving cars. But if everything was like, if roads were built on sensors and we didn't necessarily have traffic lights, cars would just communicate with each other in an integrated IoT ecosystem. Like a lot of people call it like a smart city. Like there would be like cars would totally be fine, right? Because they would just communicate to each other and say, hey, I'm supposed to stop now. You let this other car go by. But because our kind of grid system and our traffic system isn't designed for that, we still have traffic signs and we still have like lights and we still have, like these parking slots, which are designed for a human driven world. It's not designed for an AI world. So I think like from a policy perspective, there's still a lot that needs to be done to just set the world up better to really capture and realize all the value that artificial intelligence can generate for us.
Mm. Mm. So
Yeah.
recently just wanted to preface this with the article that I recently read. So the godfather of AI officially stepped down from Google and stated before he stepped down that he has basically, to summarize it, he has some regrets when he thought that AI was 40 to 50 years out to where it could surpass possibly us as humans, and it's now looking at a 5 to 10 year span. In my opinion, I call that a quantum leap, right? Especially within the technological world. And I don't know what led to his decision to do so. I'm also aware of various other things that I'm not going to get into on this interview. But I guess the next question I have to bring about is, what do you think? Do you think human evolution will be completely halted once AI gains a foothold in our society? I believe it to become another species of its own, another living form of its own, and it's heading there pretty fast.
What do you
And
mean
it doesn't
by
seem like there's any way to stop it.
what do you
Mhm.
mean by human evolution?
Well, so as far as our human evolution, it's been a long time since we've been challenged. I feel like as humans to evolve, whether it may be on a spiritual level, there is something going on that I could sense. But and not even physically, right? I'm not expecting us to grow like a six finger or anything of that nature, or a six toe, right? But I mean, like, we don't even use, so we only use a certain percentage of our brain. We can evolve past that. That this is true. I think prior civilizations have showed us that we can evolve to a certain level. And I feel in this day and age, I feel like technology before, and things that I've read before, I feel like technology was assisting the human race, right? But here we're at a precipice where, and we can see it through social media, where people are more, this is just a small example, you see people more laid back and they don't even want to communicate in a room with other people. I've seen that thousands of times since social media has become a thing, all right? In the last 10 years, I can't tell you, I could lose count even if I flash my fingers 10 times to amass the amount of times I've been in a scenario where instead of people communicating, they decided to go ahead and pay attention to their phone. So that's an attack, not an attack, but that's a slight on human communication, right? Because now we're doing it through devices and people are not really want to go face to face. So that's one strike. But then if we kind of go down that long hallway, I feel like with how AI is taking jobs, certain people, like I can see people becoming a little more lazy. You don't really have to do certain things. They have cleaning machines now. They have machines at certain hotels that bring you things, right? They're planning to, I work in the hotel business now. They're planning to even install kiosks, right? For, in a way that is not to necessarily lessen human interaction. I don't think that's their goal, but that's going to be a byproduct of such, right? So,
I have a question. Um, there's a lot to unpack there. I think that there's different fields of thought, right? Some people think that AIs are a great force for the world, and that there is a lot of productivity and value to be realized from AI. And then some folks are just going to say, hey, robots are going to take over in like a matrix type of setting, and we're going to be completely run over. And I think I have a couple thoughts. Like, I do hope that the Matrix type of world never comes, right? But I do think that, again, coming back to one of the points at the start of the call, whereas like I do think there's a lack of education in this space. And so what I mean by that, you know, how do you, develop better tools? How do you come up with a level of empathy for the end users, right? Thinking about product design, thinking about user research, user interface, user experience. How do you design tools that are best suited to fit our problems and to fit our needs? So for example, even today, like I use a lot of like sales automation tools for a lot of like email campaigns and things like that. And if I didn't have like some sort of AI tool for do that, it would just drain away a lot of my time, or I would have to hire on someone to do that function specifically. And it's the best use of someone's time to just be copy and pasting emails, sending out the emails, right? Following up and looking at analytics. Probably not. And so there's a lot of AI tools that actually do improve our work. Um, but kind of it's an education piece, right? How do we educate a younger generation on how to develop technology, how to be more thoughtful about the tools and the kind of technology that they create? And so I think, if you looked at the US education system, we are woefully unprepared to educate our kind of the next generation to capitalize on this innovation, to capitalize on this trend. If you look at
mm,
the high school curriculum, if you've been following the news, right, it's like people are cutting funding for education. People are
mm,
diverting away to other spaces. If you look at reports, right, there's certain states and certain counties where students just are not scoring as much as highly as they used 2 to 3 years ago. ago, right, before COVID. And so how do we pour more resources into educating a new generation of leaders, a new generation of human capital that is actually well equipped
Mm,
to capitalize on this trend, right? And if you compare the U.S. education system against other education systems of other countries, U.S. is lagging behind in every dimension. And
mm,
so I think there's a lot of
mm,
opportunities there. It's like part of it is just I think a lack of um, what's the right word I'm looking for? A lack of collaboration, right? How can
mm.
different stakeholders work together towards one single linear goal? But right now, there's so much that's dividing us, right? There's so many different issues when you open up the news, and there's just it's shifting focus away from like, what I think is one of the core pillars to growing a good community, a good generation is education, right? How do you pour more energy into education?
Mm. Amazing. Love what you said there. I wanted to continue the conversation by asking you, I think, a question that's a little bit more spicy, to say the
Okay.
least. Um, what do you feel about transhumanism during the WGS, the World Government Summit, I believe, of 2022? They just recently had another summit in 2023. They did speak about the implementation of technology into the human body for us to, in order to be able to keep up with the age of the machine, is what I refer to it as we move, into a deeper age of just technology, you know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think when people use the word technology, a lot of people think about software and computer science because that's more mainstream, right? But technology is
Hmm.
so in that, a wheel, a car is a piece of technology. Um, being able to have just something as simple as like an axe is a piece of technology, right? And people don't realize that technology can come in many different flavors. So to your point, I would say like, different opinions, right? But certain type of technology is helpful. So for example, technology in the medical devices space have been able to help people walk again, right? There's a lot of
Hmm.
products and tools out there for that's coming out of, MIT, where it's like if you lost your arm, maybe you're a military veteran or something like that, you can create like a skeleton for you, right? And you can feel the same movements again. If you kind of need like some sort of like replacement kneecap replacement surgery, right? There's like stem cell surgery, which will literally just regrow cartilage for you, help people walk again. Reattaching, adding like titanium rods or things like that, right, into your body to just help you be able to just perform to what a normal human being can perform if you've lost a limb or been in some sort of accident. So I think those things are all really, really important,
Hmm.
and they're incredibly helpful, right? But I think what you're talking about is once you cross beyond that threshold where it's like, oh, let's like genetically modify a baby to have certain type of gene and like that. And I think that that's where you start to get into some of the ethical kind of considerations. And so there was this like paper a few months ago and like took the world by storm where they were able to like clone like a baby in China with certain kind of characteristic traits, and then eventually that got shut down. Again, did it actually get shut down? Who knows, right? But I think we do have to walk with a level of caution, especially with some of these disciplines, right? Because we're not God, right? And we're out here trying to play God, which I think is a very interesting kind of subject area.
Another another layer that I want to add to this before shifting on is do you think that that would make the human body hackable? A computer is hackable, and I believe once you put technology into human, uh, I don't know what that looks like. I'm only talking from like an observational standpoint, but I'm wondering what would that look like? Because they're close. During the WGS, a person who held the summit, and he seemed like he was pretty convinced that they figured out how to practically hack the human body. And he started off by saying that data was the greatest currency in the world right now, people's data. like, how Facebook, Instagram, and all the rest of the companies collect our data, it could be technically used for many different purposes. I'm not going to get into those publicly, but I will say that I have stumbled across some uses that are interesting, which then leads me to ask you the question. With transhumanism on the precipice, do you believe that that would inevitably make the human body hackable?
I don't know, right? There's so much
Mm,
unknown to that question. I think a lot of this, a lot of these kind of questions have always been around for many, many years now, right? There's science fiction novels written about this in like the mid 1800s. But I think recently that's been more front and center because of everything in the media and the news with ChatGPT, OpenAI, and a lot of this incredible software. Um, I think there's like, you know, there's so much there to unpack and there's so much there to say. Um, is it out of the world of possibilities? No, I don't think so, right? Um, and I think we are progressing towards a world where is this like collaboration between AI tools and just broader kind of software and technology as a whole, plus humans. And so, generally speaking, I think we do need to be pretty thoughtful about how we approach these subjects.
mm, and educate ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah, I've been listening. What'd you say? What was the last bit that you said?
We educate the community. I think the what you see, in the news a lot is a lot of these like news publication arms are actually declaring bankruptcy. So like, I think BuzzFeed Media closed off one of their kind of news outlets. Vice Media recently declared for bankruptcy, and I think that's actually such a detriment to society as a whole. Because why should you put a cap on information, right? Information should be shared broadly, right, to different people without being filtered. And so what I liked about these news publication arms is that they were actually going on the grounds, pumping out content, pumping out materials that was actually like very interesting content, like on the grounds, right? Vice would a lot of times have these, I don't know what they're called, but potentially series where they would literally have someone on the ground interviewing what's going on, literally like what's going on with like the crises that are happening in like China, crises happening in the Middle East, and all of that was like good content and helpful content to educate the world on what exactly is going on. But unfortunately, those publication arms declare for bankruptcy, and they're like a shell of their former
Hmm,
self.
that's crazy. What do you feel about the world of information with so much technology going on? It's easy to be duped nowadays. They have deep fakes. I was just talking to someone about deep fakes. And then, like in regards to news, what does that look like? The future of how our information is being told. That's that like given to us. Is that going to lead to the ultimate control? Do you think? Will that render control? So I mean, it's already controlled, right? But I mean, even higher to where information is. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, I think good that people have access to information. So it used to be that information was gate kept, right? Certain libraries would only have information, or historically speaking, information is transferred by word of mouth. And that was how society operated for a very long time. And then you had the Industrial Revolution. You actually had a lot of like software, whatever you want to call like the revolution that's happening with computers and software today, where information essentially became more widespread. And so
Mm,
nowadays it's so easy to get access to the right information, and it's like the barrier to entrepreneurship, for example, is so much lower. So you can just write some software. You don't even need to write software. There's like low code automation tools out there where you can hack together a software product and then you can sell that product. So I
mm,
think there's never been like a greater time in history for economic mobility, and that has been a result of just access to information, access to tools, and just access period. So I think these days it's less about how do you have access to information. It's more about how do you analyze the information that you have to get the right insights, right, that are actually going to be quote unquote unique insights. There's certainly still a piece that's like access to data, right? Like companies want more and more of your data. So there's still like a piece of the data world that's still to be unearthed. But for the most part, I think a lot of the kind of interesting kind of things that you could do now with so much data is how do you analyze that data for unique insights that you can then use to like make an impact on the world, develop a company, whatever it is that you want to do.
Mm, mm. Oh, this is going to be great. This leads to my next segment. So I wanted to ask, what is your definition of a founder? What is the founder of a company? Now, I've seen other people start companies and then someone else come along and say, I'm the founder of the company. So I'm like, well, if this person started the company, by technicality, aren't they really the founder? But moving forward, I just wanted to hear what that definition is for you. McDonald's is a very good story of that, actually.
Yeah, I think, um, wow. Okay, so I think the definition of founder is very much like someone who came up with the idea of a company and then took a company from 0 to 1, right? And so just because you have an idea of a company doesn't really mean anything until you put feet on the ground to actually start this venture and grow this endeavor, right? And so I think,
Mm,
you know, a founder is someone who is an entrepreneur who has an idea and then actually takes that idea from at least at minimum 0 to 1. Obviously, there's like, founders of companies like Airbnb, and they're still with the company, many, many years later, right? And they're still technically, the founder and also the CEO or CXO of the company. But I think at minimum,
mm.
a founder needs to take a company at least from 0 to 1.
Interesting. Okay. I was always curious about that because I'm like, how is this established when I've seen other people say they were founders and I was like, well, I knew the company before you came and kind of like started driving the company maybe more forward than what they had already did. So that phrase always kind of confused me.
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing on that is that um, the founder, the definition is very broad, right? It's not just for a startup technical founder that you would find in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, but just if you open up a mom and pop pizzeria, you are also a founder, right? And I don't think there's as much like respect and love to those small business owners, right? Because they're called small,
mm,
they're not called founders. And when you hear of the word founder, you get like, it conjures up this like mythical thing that's like, oh, it's like almost like a god Jobs or something, right? Elon Musk. And yes, they are certainly founders, but I think the mom and pop pizzeria should also get some love and respect as well because they're also founders. And the journey is just as hard if to be a solopreneur. Yeah, it's a whole process.
mm. Have you yourself ever been a solopreneur? How did that go for you?
I have, I have. So I think it's possible to be a solo founder and to like have a very successful company, right? And there's a lot of examples out there, like the founder of Spanx, right? She was a solo founder, worked out well. But the other side of the script is also true too. I think the founders of Airbnb, could be wrong, but there were at least like 3 of them or maybe 4 of them. And
Mm,
so things certainly work a little bit better when you have a team, but the reality of it is that it can also work, right, if you're just a solo founder. And so it just depends on how much drive you have, how much passion you have for the business to wake up every day, even when it's raining, right, to still go to work, right? Because I think that's the hardest thing. If you're motivated, everybody can work, right? But it's what separates
mm,
good founders and good entrepreneurs is if you wake up and you don't feel like working, you still work, and then over time that compounds itself, and you just set yourself apart for the pack.
mm. How do you move past that feeling of not feeling like working? I know you have your days. We're all human, right?
It's a good have to make a habit out of it, and eventually over
Hmm.
time, once you get into the habit of it, it'll feel weird not doing it. So for example, I'm a big believer that habits make or break us, and so even the hardest things, right, whether it's learning how to play a piano or learning how to pick up a new sport, right? If you just keep working at it, again, chiseling away at it piece by piece, you'll eventually get good at it. And, at that point, you'll eventually be somewhat skilled at it. But you just have to make a habit out of it, right? You have to just wake up every day and just tackle the day. Otherwise, you're just going to fall into a slump, and it's just going to be like very difficult to really build something meaningful and build something, interesting.
Mm. What advice do you have for someone that's getting started as an entrepreneur?
Just do it. Like the Nike logo, just do it, right? And I oftentimes think one of the hardest things to do is how do you make that leap to just do something? Because so many times we'll just get up in our heads about, hey, um, I have this great idea. I want to do X, Y, Z, but I don't know if I should do it, right? I don't know. And I am a firm believer that the older you get, the harder it is to do whatever it is that you want to do, right? And
Mm,
not because physically you get older and financially, you might be a different place as you get older, but the reality of it is that you just have less energy the older you get, and energy comes in many different ways. You just get sapped a little bit. It's like, oh, I don't feel like working today, right? Or it's like, man, I woke up today, I was running on 5 hours of sleep last night. If I was younger, there's no problem. But now it's like, as I'm getting older, it's like you're starting to feel a little tired. Like life wears on you. And I think that
mm,
uh, there's never a good time, but but there's always a good time. So you just got to do it. Just bite the bullet, just take the plunge.
mm. Amazing. Another advice question is, what kind of advice can you give someone when it comes to preserving their passion about what they want to accomplish in life? So I noticed that you have your passion, which is building a community for entrepreneurs. Um, and so I just wanted to ask what that looks like to preserve that passion, because I know, like you said, there's days you probably don't even feel like, doing it. Every once in a while, you're not going to wake up every day wanting to do the same thing, right? Sometimes you want to do something different, or sometimes it's just not in us for that day, right? So,
Yeah. Well, Troy, I hope we do this in like 5 years or something. I come back and I'm still doing the same thing, but I'm just at a higher stratosphere of doing those things. So I think it's important to just make time for it and carve time out. Like if it's actually important for you, then carve time out to do it. And this is also like I'm out here, on Instagram Live, just giving out advice, and it's like I sometimes I wish I followed my own advice as well, right? And in like the day to day, when you're actually doing whatever it is, living your life, going day to day, it becomes very hard to take a step back and say, hey, am I even moving in the right direction, right? Is this what I truly get energy and passion with? And so that's why
mm,
it's so important, I think, for people to evaluate, recalibrate. If something's important for you, carve out time, right? Carve out time and do it. And be
mm.
conscientious about making time for that.
What was one thing you learned while scaling a business from 8 to 120 employees? What was one thing that you learned during that experience that you think another person can apply to their journey?
Yeah, I'll answer this question, and I do have to hop for another meeting, unfortunately. But
No problem.
the advice there is, I think you want to move with a level of urgency. And so what I mean by that is it's easy when you're kind of running a business, pursuing a passion, doing something where you feel like there's just so much time in the world. And so as a result, you're just like, yeah, I'm going to do this a little bit. Tomorrow, I'm going to chill a little way out a little bit. Maybe the third day I'll take a little rest break because I want to step back. Like, yes, do that, but layer on a level of urgency, right? How can you
Mm,
move further? How can you do a little bit more with a little bit less? Like, don't be satisfied. Always try to push the envelope. Just one additional step. And I do believe that over time that compounds on itself and you get, very meaningful results over time. And again, this is also something I'm trying to get good at, but that's one kind of advice that I wish I really internalized, right? Which is like, how do I move with more urgency? How do I move faster? Um, and people tell you advice all the time, but if you're living through it and you're going through it, you're like, oh, advice is whatever. But once you live through it, then you're like, oh shoot, this is actually really good advice. I wish I listened. But that's the
All right,
reality,
one
right? And that's just how it is.
one last question. One last question. What does being human mean to you?
Living, I think having opportunities to I think living, having opportunities to pursue the things that we enjoy, and then being able to wake up every day to pursue and chase after those things.
Mm. Thank you very much, Tony. I know you have to go. This interview will be out 24 hours past this time, and I will speak with you later. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.